All right, let's make this small pouch of ours. So here's what you're gonna need. You're gonna need a piece of fabric, shears, which actually are different than scissors, like I used before. Shears are actually larger, and keep in mind they need to be pretty sharp. So when you decide to use shears, or whichever pair of shears, I should say, you decide to use for your sewing projects, you should just use those shears for cutting only fabrics. If you rip open your Amazon boxes, okay, or start cutting paper with them, they become dull pretty fast, and you're going to notice they won't cut your fabric as cleanly and smoothly. We're going to be working with our straight pins, and also this is optional. This is a seam ripper, and I will show you how to pick out stitches that are probably a mistake and you want to redo. But again, it's optional. And of course, you're going to need your double threaded needle with your double knot at the end. And what I didn't include in the list, but of course I believe you do know, is your pattern for the pouch. So let's get started. So I chose a really awesome, well, I think it's awesome, a pretty bright and happy pattern. So by now you know that this is the back of the fabric, the wrong side of the fabric, and the right side of the fabric. Whenever we cut out patterns, we always work on the wrong side of the fabric. So you're going to place your pattern somewhere on your fabric. Now, if you have a pattern, you have to be mindful where you place sort of, I should say, your template if you want to include whatever graphics here. But if you have a solid fabric, it doesn't really matter which is the wrong or right side. That side you could use anywhere. But if you do have a solid fabric, you may want to place your pattern somewhere in the corner so that you could save this other fabric for your future projects. All right, so just for purposes of this project, I am going to place it right here. Okay, now you're going to use your pins. Your straight pins are going to hold your paper pattern to your fabric, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to push on one end of the pattern, you're going to push the pin through. Now, I have pretty long pins. You may have shorter ones. It's totally fine. Notice how I pin, okay? It goes in and out, okay? Again, here as well. It goes in through the back, out through the front. And there you go. Now, typically, you would just cut right around the paper pattern. But if you want and you feel like you might not get that right, you can actually trace it with a pencil. It's up to you. Since this is straight, I find it pretty easy to just follow along, okay, and cut right close to the paper pattern without quite cutting the paper pattern. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to carefully cut right along the paper pattern so you get the same exact size and shape of fabric. Almost forgot there to say fabric. Okay, so moving along. Now, as you notice, use my left hand. I am a lefty. Sometimes I feel the world is just not designed for us people, but I still use a righty scissor with my left hand because that's just the way I've always worked. Okay, so looks pretty good. You're going to remove your pins. And now what you're going to do is you're going to fold this right sides together. Okay, we always sew on the wrong side of the fabric because then once it's sewn, we want to turn it right side out. Okay, so with right sides together, so the right sides are touching each other, you're going to place the corners together. You're going to match it up. And we want to hold this in place, okay? So what I'm going to do is use pins again. I'm just going to use 2 pins. Again, we pin straight in through the back, out through the front. Again, straight in through the back, out through the front. So the front of my pinning looks like this, and then the back looks like that. And now, before you start sewing, sewing is sort of like engineering. Before you create it, you have to know that you have to actually think about your pouch first. So you have to think to yourself, do you want your opening to be up here, or do you want your opening to be this way? I want to make a pouch that's kind of longer and deeper. So I'm going to do this way. So now I have to think to myself, okay, if I want to do that, which road am I going to take? And I know I need to sew from here down and here down. And just for the purpose of sewing and practicing, I may just go across here, but you don't have to. So if you decide to do that, you'll start on either end, go all the way down, turn, and up, and end off, okay? So if you feel confident in sewing a straight line, you could just start sewing. But if you feel that, you know what, you're still not sure how to make a straight line or how to sew a straight line, you could draw in some guides. So if you want to make that line, just place your ruler about 1/4 inch in, okay, and make yourself a nice line. Doesn't have to be too dark at all. Now, you can't really place it if you have the same pins as me with the ball head, the pin head. You can't really place it there. It's kind of shaky. So just keeping that in mind, you may want to flip it around. Don't draw your line too close to the edge of your pouch, and I'll show you why after. Okay, if you sew too close and when you turn your fabric inside out, or I'm sorry, yes, your fabric right side out, you can actually make a hole and puncture it through. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So now what you're gonna do is you're gonna start sewing and on the line. So it doesn't really matter at this point because both sides are the insides or the backs, because this is gonna end up on the inside of the pouch. So again, it doesn't really matter if you start from this side or that side. And you're gonna work your way down, okay, just like you've been practice sewing 5 or 6 stitches per inch. Okay, now you're gonna notice a slight difference here. And the difference is that you have 2 fabrics. But if you have a really simple cotton fabric, it should not be an issue. And you will keep sewing. So if you get stuck at any point while you're sewing this simple pouch, what you can do is you can just stop the video and you can do whatever it is that you need. If you have a little knot, or if you have a tangle you want to get out, just like that. Okay, it's like I said, tangle and mine tangled. And you're going to just work your way around, okay? Just remember, when you get to the edge, you're going to make a very strong end off, just like I showed you in the past class. So keep going as I work on mine as well. Okay, so as I'm coming to the end, I'm going to remember that I need to make a super strong end off stitch. And I will show you why that is when I flip it right side out. Sorry about that. I didn't stay on as I finished sewing all around my pouch because I figured you're so busy sewing yours, you don't need to be seeing me sew mine. So I am ending off, making a super strong stitch right here. Okay, remember you pull through, in through the loop. That was my second one. Now I'm going to trim it. I will remove my pins. And before you turn it right side out, you're going to trim the corners right here. So you're going to just trim them. Make sure you don't trim where you sewed or on your stitches, but just trim the corners. And hopefully you sewed 5 or 6 stitches per inch. And now for the fun part is you're going to turn it right side out. Okay, and you're going to poke out the corners. Now typically, and I did not tell you to use and I didn't put this on the supply list, but this is a point turner. And what it does is it goes into the corners and it pokes out the corners, okay, to get it nice and square. If your corners to anything you sew that square look like this, it means you didn't poke them out enough, right? So you're going to use your point turner, or if you don't have that, you could even use anything that's not sharp, like even your scissors. Actually, excuse me, your shears. If your shears are not sharp and are not pointy, you could use that. You don't want to use sharp ones because it will poke a hole through your adorable pouch and you'll be upset, okay? So here's your pouch, and this is why we sew on the wrong side, because when we turn it right side out, it needs to look fabulous with just the seam and no stitches. Okay, and when you pull tight, if you did your end off stitches really well, okay, it won't fall apart. Okay, so mine came out good. I hope yours did too. Now, let me show you what it looks like if you don't make 5 or 6 stitches per inch. Here's the issue, okay? First of all, these are huge stitches here, right? See how big these are? And I did that purposely just to show you, okay, that when you stuff it, let's say this was a pillow, when you stuff it, it actually opens up and the stuffing comes out. That's why you want to sew really small stitches. And let's say your end off stitch is not tight enough. Okay, here's what happens. Rip. Okay, and then you're going to say, oh my gosh, what did I do? Something went wrong. Well, you always want to, wherever your pressure points are, so pressure points for here are here, okay, you always want to end off well and do 5 or 6 stitches per inch. Okay, and also this may happen if you sew really close to the edge, meaning, okay, instead of sewing away like we did, if you get super close, it will rip apart just like I showed you. Okay, so I hope you understand the construction of this simple sewing project, and I will see you in the next class. Here's how to use the seam ripper. Let's say the stitches that I've created on this pouch are wrong or too large, too small, I don't know, didn't follow the correct line, okay? Let's say that. What you would do with the seam ripper is literally, it's pretty common sense, is literally just stick it under the seam and rip it. That's what I mean by literally. It's called a seam ripper. You rip out the stitches and then it comes out easily. Again, this is optional, but if you're collecting your sewing tools, you may want to add this.